He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 25 years of experience. Together, we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. We're back with another episode, Henry, and today we have a special guest on the other side of the pond, Marc Lewis, who is the Dean of the School of Communication Arts in London, a great institution of learning for young and not so young folks who want to get into our industry. He'll tell us more about his background, how he got into it. Let's join the conversation. Okay, we're delighted to have as our guest today on this edition of the Brief Brothers, my new friend, Marc Lewis, who is the Dean of the School for Communication Arts 2.0 in London. Marc reached out to me, I can't believe it's been 4 or 5 years, but it's been a number of years. He was feeling crazy one day and somehow picked up a copy of one of my books and read it and liked it. So I'm grateful for that, Marc. And we had a conversation, and then you invited me to speak to one of your classes. And now I'm coming back. I'm coming back in actually next month in January to address another class. Is it the same? Obviously not the same students, but the same class or different class?
It's the same. It's the same school, the same curriculum. Yeah.
Okay. So it's just new group of students.
Yeah.
But I'll be talking about the single-minded proposition. So, Marc, welcome to the Brief Brothers. Would you just give us a little bit of background about your involvement with the school, your role as a dean, what you were doing before that, and what you're doing now? And then we're going to just look forward to a great discussion.
Beautiful. Oh, look, thank you so much for the invite. I'll give you the story of how I ended up running this school. If I'm going too long, just tell me to move on. I went to this school as a scholarship student in 1993, so I'm really that old. And I won the scholarship through a very artsy national newspaper called The Guardian. It's very white, male, middle class. And I'm very grateful that I won the scholarship because I had been expelled from every school I'd been to before that school. I left school with no grades in my we call them GCSEs and A levels. I don't know what you Americans would call that stuff, but whatever it is, I fucked up. And in 1992, 93, my father was arrested and made bankrupt. And so I had to get a job to put food on table. And I was in a department store, in a tableware department in a department store. And in my lunch break, I went to the canteen and I found this competition and I won the scholarship. And it's an incredible school. The man was an incredible teacher who valued the idea before the execution. And we might talk about that in a bit when we talk about single-minded proposition. He had Parkinson's disease when he was running the school and he got very ill. And as I left the school to start my career, sadly, he had to retire and the school closed. And then a few years later, he passed away. I had a okay career in advertising. If I have a name, my career was really in technology, solving problems in technology. Thankfully, that's where the money was. And I fell out of love with money in 2008. I had a bit of a breakdown. I reopened the school in 2010. And because I won the scholarship, my intention was to reform the school where there would be lots and lots of scholarships, at least a third of our intake having scholarships. This year, 50% of scholarships.
Wow, that's great.
We do that. Yeah, we do that by working really closely with our industry. So we feel that we are owned by, well, the advertising and the brand and the media industry, and we are supplying them with the very best possible creative talent. Since 2012, every year since 2012, we've been the most awarded ad school on the planet. So that's at D&AD, that's at Cream, in I guess our versions of the guns, we are pound for pound the most awarded ad school on the planet. And I think that one of the reasons for that is what John gave us, idea before execution. And another idea, a reason why we're so successful is our diversity. That scholarships means that we have a really beautifully diverse cohort. And I always like to say that creativity is about connecting dots, but you've got to collect dots in order to connect the dots. And the more disparate you are when you pick those dots up, the more interesting those connections are going to be when you put them back together. So I think that's been a part of our source. And then I think the third part is be good, do good. And what I mean by that is our school's North Star is the word reciprocity. The idea that we all have a duty to put more water back in the well than we took, to leave our village in a better state. And what that means is it leans towards positive thinking. We all have this positive outlook. We can still be cynical. I think it's important that creatives sometimes are, but we're always thinking, how can we make things better? How can we make our village better? And that allows for a really beautifully creative environment. So, and you'll see that a lot in the ideas that come out of our students' books. So yeah, that's my story. As I went to the school closed. It's called 2.0, as you alluded to, because I reopened the school with the industry in 2010. And yeah, it's now just about to hit 2022. So come up towards 12 years. And for 10 of those 12 years now, we've been top of the planet, having a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, well done. Congratulations. I got a bunch of questions. Henry, I'm going to just let you get a word in here.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say it's, to me, a fascinating story. You're an alumnus of the school. The school closes, and you reach a point in your career where you're looking for something different. You're looking for something to inspire you, and you go back and basically reestablish this institution that had closed. I can only imagine the challenges that you face, like in terms of like mounting something, because there wasn't a continuity there from the previous chapter, right? Like you didn't inherit any students or anything like that. You had to start from scratch, I would imagine.
Well, nearly. I think there was some goodwill. The man that ran the school before me, John Gillard, was an incredible human and an incredible creative educator. And so, for example, he taught Sir John Hegarty, or he taught, Graham Fink, for example, just two of dozens and dozens of examples. And so it was very easy for me to get John Hegarty's support from day one, because we shared John Gillard as our teacher. So yes, you're right. I had to restart the school from scratch. In a way, that was a benefit, because it allowed me to do it for a new era with new problems to solve and new ways, new psychologies to use to motivate the student and things like this. But I did have some capital to spend, which John left me, which was his incredible reputation.
Right. So let's get into some of the nuts and bolts here. Henry and I have talked in previous episodes about the dearth of training, that agencies over here have really kind of left it up to you, the creative, art director, creative director, copywriter, to learn the business on your own and to come with a portfolio and figure that out. And they just don't have time or the interest. Compared to what you went through when you were a student there, what are some of the differences and what are some of the similarities that you're seeing in young or youngish students today?
There's a few questions there, isn't there? So I think the first thing I'm going to say is I feel that in the 80s and perhaps up until maybe the very early 90s, so all the way through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the very early 90s, there were a few incredible creative leaders inside most of the big agencies. And again, apologies, I only know a few of the names in America, because I was really at the time very much focusing on, the D&ADs, which were at the time very much more UK based than they are now. But in the UK, you were looking at Hegarty or Trott or Webster or whomever. And, these were people that you just wanted to be in their company, and you would learn so much of them. Paul Arden, so many of the greats were great because they were able to be connected to the God that is Paul Arden. I don't think that's the case so much anymore. I think a lot of the creative leaders are creative leaders because of their Twitter profile, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And that's a very different skill set, and it's not a skill set that's going to benefit, selling another $100 million of soap powder or whatever whatever the challenge is. So I feel that one of the big differences for a learner entering the industry now versus 30 or so years ago is they need to be even smarter about who they're going to stand next to and learn from in the early parts of their career, because that is going to send them off in a trajectory. And if you change your angle slightly, you might fly or you might hit the ground. And so I think that's the first big difference is it's much harder to find real creative leadership. And I think that a recent episode of yours with Bob, he was alluding to that. It's much harder to find, there's a plug for a flashback to a previous episode. It's much harder to find strong creative leadership inside organizations from which we're going to learn. I think that's one real big point of difference. I think another point of difference is that when we were playing to learn to get into this game, really there was only paid for media, traditional media, TV, radio, print, outdoor. And now there are so many choices. And to some extent, that's incredible, right? So many canvases that we can paint on and have ideas with. But to another extent, there's almost like so much choice. It can almost be paralyzing to somebody who hasn't yet got the confidence. And confidence comes from being around great creative leaders. So you have this this spiraling effect where the world is getting a lot more complicated exponentially, and the learner is coming into the industry without necessarily the right support to take them on a trajectory. And that's why creative education is even more important now than it was when I was a student in 1993. Because if you get the foundations right early on, it's slightly less critical, it's slightly less damaging that they're not going to be standing next to a Paul Arden or a John Hegarty or a John Webster or a whomever at the start.
I think all roads lead back to the consolidation of independent agencies into these multinational networks. What you're talking,
that's one of it.
The creative personalities. There's not room for creative personalities a lot of times in these big kind of faceless corporations, right? They don't have as much flexibility to be those personalities. And the other part is these independent agencies of the 60s, 70s, and 80s were they had a vested interest in training their people and creating a mindset of this is how we do it here at Ogilvy, or this is how we do it here at DDB. And I think we've lost that with all of the cost cutting. And it's like, well, we don't have time to train people. We don't have time to or money to set up instruction. And so like all that stuff now is either you're learning on the job, usually poorly, or you're bringing in some outside learning from either a university or from a creative school, an advertising school. So, but I think a lot of the ills of the industry kind of go back to those mid 80s when we started seeing all this consolidation, and all the damage didn't happen immediately. I think what we're seeing is, a decade and a half later, a couple decades later, is the cumulative effect of all the cost cutting, of all of the, bottom line.
I think you're right. I think you're right, but I think that I would just put a little bit more onto that and say, yes, consolidation. Also, the change in the business model from agency commissions was a massive thing. So, but then also the first dot-com bubble of '95 happened about the same time as consolidation and agency commission. And what happened with that first dot-com bubble was all of the really smart entrepreneurial minds in agencies could see agency consolidation, agency commission, making it harder to be able to work your way up and make a ton in ad land. Where's my Ferrari going to come from? But heck, I can have a .com idea and quickly get some Sequoia capital or whatever into it, right? And suddenly I'm a paper 100 millionaire or whatever like this. And then we get the 2008 crash, and so I think we've got a series of unfortunate events. But yeah, the net of everything that's happened from the very late 80s to .com to global recessions and so forth, you're absolutely right, and cost cutting, and you're absolutely right. The net effect of it is most agencies are hollow. They have a false name on the front of somebody that died 30 or 40 years ago, and a lot of people in mid and senior management, their brains also died 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah. One of the things that we've talked about, and I've heard this from others, is that an agency, for example, like Ogilvy, When I would visit, I had a buddy who was a copywriter at Ogilvy. We both started out at Hoffman, York, and Compton in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which was part of the Compton network, and then it bought itself back. He went on to Chicago and worked for Ogilvy, and I would visit him from time to time at the shop. And when you go into that office, in the reception area, there's a big sign above the reception desk. It's a quote from Ogilvy. It says,
Somewhere else.
"We sell or else." Now, I haven't been there in years. I've heard rumors that's gone. It's not there
Not
anymore.
only is it gone, I stole it and I changed it to "we sell or we die." We
Well-
sell or we die. Yes, we sell or else. For me, it's more critical than that. If we don't work out how to sell product as an industry, we're fucked by the consultancy industry and by the technology industry.
Yeah.
Those two industries, they just want to double fuck. Am I allowed to say that on your podcast? I'm a teacher. They want to double enter us.
Henry, can we say fuck?
We're all grown-ups here.
Okay, I guess we can say fuck.
They're coming to eat our lunch, and unless we get back to what we were great at, the consultancies, are busy hoovering it up. They understand how to sell to the C-suite. They have the chief exec's trust, and if it's not them, Meta have the data, and they have the trust, or they don't, but they.
Yeah, well, interesting because I also have another college instructor whose students I talk to regularly. It's the University of Minnesota's Hubbard School of Mass Communication and Journalism, and they do a creative development and strategy class. Last time I talked to them, and I'll be talking to them again in February, Henry and I talked about this, and I said, I'm going to ask the students, I'll do a little poll. I asked the students, how many of you think of yourselves as capitalists? There were 19 students in the class, 5 raised their hands. So I said, well, how would you feel if your first account, your first assignment at the agency that you maybe were hired at, you had to sell Pop-Tarts? How would you feel about that? And it was like, only one guy spoke up and said, hey, I'm looking for a creative challenge. It's like, okay, this guy's going to do well, because you said earlier, which is something I've said often, you said it slightly different. You said we teach idea first, execution second. Yeah. I like to say idea first, tactic second, basically the same thing. So principles haven't changed. Principles are the same from, Burn Box Day or even earlier. You got to have a great idea. But are you seeing that your students are open to the idea of actually selling widgets and Tide?
I'm seeing that I have to filter the ones that want to save the panda. I have to filter them at selection. A lot of people feel that pandas need saving and tofu needs to be on everybody's menu. And look, have you come across Steve Harrison yet, who wrote
Yes.
Can't Sell, Won't Sell?
Yes, I've read the book. You hope to get him on the show.
Steve is a very good friend, and I'm very grateful that he gave me the book to read before it first came out. Every year I write a new story for my students to experience. So the whole learning journey is different every year. There's a narrative arc. And last year's story was inspired by Steve's book. So the idea was we sell or we die. And every year my students get to name their agency. I forget what year you came and talked out last, Howard, but this year they're called Boat, because the story is we've got to learn from the best work out there. So GOAT is the greatest of all time. Boat is the best of all time. So this intake are called Boat. That's what they decided to be called. Last year's intake called themselves Checkout. On the story of Steve Harrison's Can't Sell, Won't Sell, they called themselves Checkout. And the reason they called themselves that is they wanted to remind themselves every day, we need to make the checkout registers ring. Yeah. Our job is to make that checkout register ring. If we're not doing that, we're just making art. And that's how my students feel, is we sell. That's our job.
So you mentioned something interesting. You said you screen them at the application phase, I guess, to kind of, because I agree. I've seen it. I addressed the Miami Ad School here a couple of years ago, and I had a list of 10 pontifications. And the first one is, if you have a problem with a free market economy and capitalism, this probably isn't the right industry for you. You're going to be miserable, because whatever artistic talent you have, you're going to be putting it in the service of the exact people that you don't like. And I saw a lot of jaws dropping, as I was saying that, and the Q&A, that was the thing that got the most response was like, well, do you think you can change it from the inside? I'm like, well, maybe you can as a junior art director in some big agency, but I doubt it. I said, you're going to be miserable. And I give them anecdotes to explain, and it's my personal philosophy. I give them my anecdotes why I don't have a problem with it, and why I think selling products that my fellow human beings have made to other fellow human beings who voluntarily want to buy them is not a problem. But that's fine. That's my point of view. But my advice is think about what you're doing. You're condemning yourself to basically working for the enemy. And so I agree. I think that's a very fascinating thing about, letting them know up front before they invest the time and the money in an education.
I think so. You're right, and also it's for the benefit of our culture inside our school, because what we need are people that are competitive, because that's how we thrive, and who want to see, that we can hit our targets, get results, get sales happening, and if we don't have that, if people join our organization, the school year, with an opposite of that culture, it will rot that culture. And so we have to protect that culture, which means we need to only want to welcome in people who are there for the right reason. And the right reason, in our opinion, is to sell stuff, right? To persuade people's minds to change, whether it's a commercial sale or a political sale or whatever it is. That's our job. We sell or else, or we sell or we die.
Well, you kind of stumbled on something, which is, I think, in the industry, this obsession with causes, with NGOs, nonprofits, and that's all great. And I think that they need creativity as well. But the reality is, where does most advertising revenue come from, right? Where does all the money that's going into this media come from? It comes from business, from people trying to sell stuff, products and services.
Packaged
And
goods.
I think that has been diminished overall in our industries, the importance of products and services and selling products and services.
And you
What's
can see that.
interesting is, whilst that's been happening, whilst this industry has moved from making fucking funny ads that sell product to all of a sudden wanting to save the panda and force feed us tofu, we've stopped being trusted as a profession by the public. They now have ad blockers so that we don't come onto their computer screens, and they'll find ways of blipping us not to be on their TV screens. They hate us. We're trying to save the world and they hate us. We used to make them want to laugh, to buy our stuff, and they loved us. Boom.
Lawyers have actually climbed above advertising profession as the least hated. We're now below lawyers.
It's
bonkers,
right?
Yeah.
It's really frightening, and there's the reason why. It's because we're doing the wrong thing. We're being fakes and frauds. So no wonder they don't like us.
And you can
we need to go back to doing what we were born to do, which is to sell shit in an entertaining, engaging way.
Right. You can see examples of that in the awards. The award shows are promoting this, are promulgating it because of the things that they acknowledge. Let me go back a little bit to talk about your student makeup. I had my first job as a copywriter at the age of 30. I'd done some other things. So when I heard you telling me before, I'll give Terry Ells a shout out here, because he sent me an email with some really astute questions about the single-minded proposition. And you mentioned to me that this is a young man who's, by advertising standards, not quite so young. He's about 40. Well, I started my career at 30, and I thought I was a little on the old side, but I still managed to get 26 years in before I retired. And I'm doing a version of what you're doing, but obviously I'm a one-man band, and you are a little grander than that. What's the makeup? Give us is there a typical profile of who's in your School of Communication Arts?
So first of all, I'm going to say that one's never too old to start the career. So obviously David Ogilvy came in later in life. Howard Luck Gossage, one of the greatest creatives of all time. People always talk about the DDB side, the East Coast side, but for me, what was happening with Gossage on the West Coast, and I believe he was in his 40s when he joined the profession, and it was only illness and his early passing that stopped him from having a very long and glorious career that he definitely deserves. So I think it's it's never too late to join this profession. In fact, joining it a bit later in life means perhaps that you join with more insight and empathy, learning how it is to try and afford the weekly shop, or pay for insurance, or save money aside in a jar for a holiday, or you have empathy and insight for these things, and energy and empathy and synergy is going to allow us to do creativity, right? So I think that Terry, as an example, a gent in his 40s, he has the energy of a gent in his 20s. He reached out to you. He's curious, like a teenager. He's got the energy like a teenager, but he's got the wisdom, and he wrote to you, and that's going to carry him well. The school thrives and vibes on diversity. So right now it's very important that we remain focused on color. And there's no diversity until we have true color diversity. Gender is important too, but so too are finding people that are recovering addicts, or from the care system, or age, or neurodiversity, or physical disabilities, or regional diversity, or people that are carers that would like to learn and study and then work when their care commitments are over. Diversity comes as the diversity of diversity, right? Is what you say. So I just want everybody in my studio. What I know is, as I say, the best ideas come from connecting dots in unexpected ways. The more we collect the dots from interesting places and bring them to our studio, the more interesting and unexpected those connections are going to be. And so for as long as we can try to bring people from as many different backgrounds as possible together, who share one common thread, which is we want to make fucking great work. We just want to make fucking great work. And by the way, we all agree fucking great work is work that's effective, right? It's not work that's got the most beautiful typography, that we're all going to bow down to the way that it was lit, or whatever. It's, did it answer the brief? Did it open 5 more factories? Did it put 20 more thousand people into jobs? Did it help this entrepreneur who borrowed $2 million to back an idea? Did it stop them from losing their house? These are the things that I think we as a cohort, as a school, all stand behind, as we want to make great work that works for these reasons. But we all come from different places with different stories and music and food and stuff like this. And that's going to make our work interesting.
Yeah. Well, let's turn our attention, because you mentioned it just in passing, to the creative brief. Because you said, we want to make sure that the work answers the brief, that it's effective, that it sells. So, Bob Hoffman had his own views on the status of the creative brief. I addressed a chapter in my book on Paul Feldwick, and we had Paul as a guest way back when. And although I think he's a fan of the brief, he's just not a big fan of the single-minded proposition. So how do you approach teaching the brief to your students these days? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, so first of all, one of the things I think I like about Feldwick, and one of the things I think I like about this industry, is there's no one right answer, right? So nobody owns the truth, or we can reinterpret the truth in different ways. So Bob talks about fame, and he's right. We got to start with fame. You got to make brands famous. We understand, for all the reasons that Bob so brilliantly articulated in that episode. Without fame, we're screwed. But you were right in how you responded. You got to go back to the why. When John Gillard opened the School of Communication Arts, previously he had a career in university, and in university they focused really on the how, and he was much more interested in the why. The why is everything. Why do you want to be famous? And this comes us to the why are we doing this brief? Like right now, my students have just been given a live brief today for a major global sports product. And the job is to create fame between tournaments. I can't mention who it is, I'm under NDA, but you can guess it's a major global sports brand, and the brief is keep the fame going between tournaments. The first question has got to be why? Why do you want us to keep that fame? So, and then who? Who do you want that fame to be resonating in their heads of? And then why that as well? So the who and the why question needs to keep on happening until we go, Yeah, I get it. I get it. If we get these people to be obsessing about our brand, we're going to help make this dollar. That's why. Now, how are we going to go about and do it best? Well, and now we need a strategy, right? So now we need to work out like how are we going to change these people's state of behavior in order to achieve what our client has said, which is effectively this client quite directly create fame. And to do that, we've got to work out where we want to dig to find our treasure. We as creatives need to find that treasure. And a planner can try and point us towards somewhere on a map. The truth is, a planner and a suit, they don't know how to dig for treasure. They're not creatives, they're suits and they're planners. So they can try and tell you somewhere on a map to go digging, but the fuck do they know? They're going to put you in the water. No, the only way that you're going to find where to go on the map is you've got to go and ask questions. And creatives, good creators, are inquisitive. They're curious. They got interesting questions that they want to ask, that they'll ask, a dissatisfied customer, or that they'll go and do a factory visit, they'll go and find a deck that's been uploaded to SlideShare that wasn't supposed to be there. It's confidential, but you found, they're curious, right? They're fucking hungry, which your typical suit in an agency and a junior planner, they're just not. A creative is curious, and at the same time they've been collecting interesting articles and bits and pieces, and they'll read something and they'll see something, and there's a synapse, a connection. And there's the start of strategy, right? It's all right. I saw this interesting thing over here on the map. I'm going to dig it a little bit and work out where that's going to take me. And then we get the start of the who and the how. And then we've got to think about, well, what are we going to say to them? Like, what's going to persuade them about our client that's going to change their lives? And then we get to the start of the single-minded proposition. So for me, a great single-minded proposition is something that you're very quickly going to shout to who you've worked out your prospect is before that lift door shuts. So you talk about the elevator pitch. You can talk to somebody from the 2nd to the 10th floor. We haven't got time for that.
No.
Need that. No, we need that door to shut. As that door is shutting, you shout out to your prospect, and they are so interested that either they're going to open the door and let you in, or they're going to go and Google the fuck out of you when they get to wherever it is that they're going. That's the proposition, which comes from, I think, having the really working out who I want to, why is this brief? Who am I talking to? Why am I talking to them? Got it, off we go. Single-minded, what am I going to say? What's going to persuade them? What's their, back to Steve Harrison again, what's their problem, and what's the solution that we're giving them that's going to make them want to fall in love with what we're being told to help them fall in love with. So yeah, long answer to the Bob bit. Fame, yeah, but then the creative can't rely on anybody to solve where to find that fame button on the map. That's the strategy, and with it, the creative strategy, I think.
So what you're saying, Marc, is that you believe and you teach that creatives need to be intimately involved in writing the brief. Am I hearing you right?
I'm saying 99 times out of 100, the brief that comes through an agency is going to be dog shit. And yeah, okay. So if you get a dog shit brief, give your agency what you're being asked to if you have to, but then also write a proper brief. Do your work. Do the work for them. Impress them. You'll be remembered for it. You might not be thanked for it immediately, but you'll be remembered for it. Learn how to write the proper brief and then show that work to it. Will end up being seen. And great work is gonna absolutely blindside the formulaic shit work that comes from, the formulaic shit briefs. My school is, I've got to be a little bit careful here because we've got a lot of agencies that support us and set us briefs. I'm going to say that a lot of the agencies that we see could benefit from going on a course learning how to write a proper fucking brief.
Henry, I'm not going to touch that one. That's all yours.
No, listen, I've said from the beginning of the podcast, I said, just because you have a strategist or a planner on staff doesn't mean you have a good strategist or planner on staff. And I think that there is kind of a magic medium where you have strategists that are creative minded and you have creatives that are strategy minded. And when there's that overlap, you usually are speaking the same language. The problem is when you have a strategist who's too much in the business world and not enough in the creative world, or when you have creators that are too much just in the art and copy world and not enough in the business world. So there has to be some sort of overlap and some sense of being simpatico between those two departments, because when they do work well together, I think the benefit of having strategy and having creators work well with strategy is not measurable, that how great it can be. So I have favorite creatives I've worked with in my career, and there's certain creatives that consider me their favorite planner of having worked with them. So, it's like everything. There's good lawyers, there's bad lawyers, there's good strategists, there's bad strategists. But I do believe that in my career, my success has come from being empathetic to the creatives. I've always viewed myself as part of the creative team, part of the creative process. And that's why a lot of my things, like I've told, I've repeated this a million times on this podcast, is I don't see my brief as an endpoint of strategy. It's a beginning of the conversation. And because the creative process is iterative and organic, sometimes they come back at me and I realize I missed something in writing my brief and say, you know what, this is really insightful. Let's pivot and go toward this direction. And as a brief writer, I think you have to be humble enough to do that. You can't just say, well, this is the brief that we had, and now we have to stick to it till the death. That doesn't make any sense to me.
I agree with that, and so one of the things that you said is that the best planners are creative and the best creators are strategic. I think that's true. I also think it's really revealing. So it's really revealing that we need to make sure that our creatives are strategic. So let's put that to one side and pick that up in a bit. One of the reasons why we make sure that our students get to meet Howard and similar, and I've got some incredible planning mentors that are guests and also faculty. My head of strategy at the school was a planner at the Partners. He was a very senior planner at the Partners. So they're really, really valuable. But what's insightful is what you said is the best planners need to be creative. And here's what I'm going to suggest for a bit of creative tension is I think that the very best planners are creatives that are just fucked in the current system, because the current system is built on the Bill Bernbach system of copy and art in a team. In the 1960s, the guy puts together copy and art, and we follow that messiah for the next 60 years. In my judgment, putting a really creative planner with somebody that's really got language or social or art or semiotic of filmmaking or whatever, starting to create differently shaped teams will take us to better work as a team. So what you said is I might need to go back and rewrite the brief. What I'm suggesting is you should be at that table all the time in that conversation with other creative people, not you go back and write a brief. No. Because so go on, Howard.
Marc, that's exactly what Henry does. I mean, we've talked about this many times. He is intimately involved with his creatives and they with him. And this is, we've had discussions in the past about what collaboration means. I have one idea and he has his other, but we're actually not as far apart as we sometimes think. But that's your argument is my argument. Because of the teams that Bernbach created in the 60s, we need to do that same kind of teamwork in our agency setup, especially if we don't have a Henry on staff.
The organizational structure is one that is built to what you're talking about, Marc, which is there's a creative department and then there's a strategy or a planning department, and we're separate. So therefore it is automatically assumed that my role is to come in, give the brief, and then leave, and not stay behind and not sit there and spitball ideas with them and so forth, which sometimes there's a little bit of erosion of those walls, right? Like when you and this is something Howard and I have talked about. You did a good briefing when the briefing meeting actually kind of spirals into a brainstorming session, right? When people are sparking and they're already talking and they're already thinking about, so that wall kind of starts to come down. But that's only the best of cases, right? It's not something that we as agencies have decided to instill as a new sort of structure of working between strategists and creatives, or strategy-minded creatives, right? So
now you wanted to bring something back to the table, Marc. You put it aside.
I was kind of interested. I'd love to know, Henry, is as a great strategist, as a planner, what stopped you from going and becoming a creative?
You know, it's funny. I always envisioned myself more of as a copywriter. Um,
Right.
and at some point, I did have ambitions to become a creative and someday be a creative director. Um, you know, I think it's just you're faced with the situation you have at hand with your current employer, what they need, what they're looking for, and
This is
there's
my point.
yeah,
And this is my point. I'm certain that you've made a lot of fantastic work in your career. I'm willing to bet that if the systems were to not have if it wasn't so departmentalized, if planning and creative were truly one, my hunch is that that creative director in you, that copywriter and creative director in you, would have been even happier, and you're happy now, and you've got your fucking VR racing thing behind you. You're living the dream, but even but
Well,
even
no,
happier.
I agree with you, Mark, because I was a copywriter and creative director for all my career. And when I wrote these books, first on the creative brief and second on the single-minded proposition, because I was also a direct response copywriter, which really makes you dive into analysis and
talk about
measurement.
sell or die.
Yeah, exactly. I realized that I might have had a lot more fun had I become a planner instead of a copywriter, because I would have had I was been a writer since I'm 9 years old. I've always been a writer. So that would have been a built-in skill. So I like the way you're thinking here, that it's not about the silos. It's about how do we work together and get the best in collaboration.
Yeah, it's like I said earlier, energy and empathy and synergy. The planner brings us that empathy bit, the creative spark is the energy. It happens in synergy. And if we can make it happen inside that one team, that explosion is going to be all the brighter, right? So energy and empathy and synergy. So I guess that brings us back to why we teach our creatives so much strategy. Why one of the ways I sometimes describe our school and how we're a bit different to other art schools and universities. This is perhaps going to reveal my age, but back in the 1980s, there was like Dungeons and Dragons and World of Warcraft were big things. Do you remember that? And you'd
Never did it,
create a
but I know it.
character. You'd have a certain amount of points or whatever to spread to define your character. Are you going to be a warrior or a sorcerer or a trader? You would define your points, would define your character if you get it. And I think the same is true with an ad school. Is you can put those points into craft, or you can put those points into strategy. So you've got a certain amount of learning hours that you can invest in talent, and you've got to decide how many of those hours you're going to put into things like, semiotics, typography, layout, words that sell, how to write for radio, la la la, and how much of those hours are you going to put into why the fuck are we doing this? And there are some universities that will put like 80 or 90 or even 100% of their learning hours into the how, the craft. Um, and okay, if that's what they want to do. At my school, I think we put about 60 to 70%, yeah, about 70% into strategy, and then only maybe about 30% into craft. And for a student that might come to us having been at art school, design school, film school, if they come from one of those pathways, that can be frustrating because they just want to go and make ads. But you're not allowed to make ads until you know how to think, how to find and solve a problem. So, it's only when you learn how to spot a problem and what a potential solution is that you've got any right to tell anybody else what you think that fucking solution is.
Right.
So that's our philosophy.
Well, Mark, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the Brief Brothers. Your students and all of London and the UK are blessed to have you and your school to
Well,
give them a
so
great
Howard, can I use this as a plug to say that we now have global students now that
Oh,
COVID
great.
is a thing. We teach people live online. So if you are particularly on the East Coast, we find your time zone fits our and the way that you like to start your day earlier than us. You Americans like to wake up a bit earlier than us. What we found is our school is what a lot of Americans seem to be looking for, right? So, and I like Americans because they like to sell. So
Some of us
pull
do anyway.
it out. Some of them do. So yeah, absolutely. If you know anybody that wants to come to the world's best ad school that happens to be from America, fuck it, we'll have them, please.
Well, we will certainly mention that. We'll list your website URL in our episode, and our promotion for the episode. And you should do the same. We do a lot of stuff on YouTube and LinkedIn. So if you've got other ways to promote this episode to get the word out, we'll take your assistance. So Marc Lewis, thank you so much for being a guest. And I look forward to seeing you again and talking to your students in January.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. Good to see you both.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach. And together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time.